The restaurant buzzed with the noise of clinking cutlery, murmuring guests, and hurried footsteps. A man in plain business attire stepped inside quietly, unnoticed at first. He wore no fancy watch, no designer shoes, just a simple man with calm eyes. His name was Ethan Wilder, though no one in the restaurant recognized him. He liked it that way. He took a table near the back, not too far from the kitchen doors, where he could observe without being obvious. His demeanor was quiet, almost invisible, but his eyes were sharp. He scanned the room with a purpose hidden behind calm curiosity. This wasn't just dinner. This was a test. A young waitress approached, trying to mask the fatigue in her voice. Her name tag read Ruby. Her hair was neatly tied, but her movements carried the heaviness of someone used to being under pressure. Despite that, she smiled genuinely and greeted him with kindness. Ethan looked at her hands when she handed him the menu. Rough palms, cracked nails. Not from neglect, but from labor. As she stepped away to grab water, a loud voice broke through the restaurant's rhythm. Martin Blake, the regional manager, walked in like he owned the place. He immediately began criticizing the staff, pointing out flaws that didn't need correcting, barking at Ruby in front of customers. No one said a word. They were used to this. Ethan took it all in without reacting. He didn't flinch or frown. He just watched. When Ruby returned, he asked for her recommendation. She hesitated for a second, then leaned slightly closer and said, "The chef pours his heart into the ribeye." It wasn't part of the corporate script. She wasn't trying to impress. It was a quiet truth. Ethan was surprised. Most servers echoed marketing lines. She offered sincerity. He ordered the ribeye, medium rare. As she left to place the order, he opened the menu again, not to read, but to listen. The tension in the room wasn't loud, but it was thick, and he wanted to know why. Dinner service began to pick up, and the restaurant shifted into controlled chaos. Orders flew in, plates clattered, and voices rose just beneath the threshold of shouting. Ethan sat quietly, sipping water, observing everything. The patterns, the panic, and the pressure. From his corner, he saw Blake storming in and out of the kitchen, clipboard in hand, frown permanently etched across his face. He wasn't helping. He was hunting. Staff flinched when he passed. He scolded a hostess for mispronouncing a wine name, and later snapped at a server for laughing too loudly. In the back, Ethan noticed something else. Blake stuffing leftover bread and salad into trash bins instead of letting staff take it home. Moments later, a cook asked for a 10-minute break after 6 hours on his feet. Blake denied it without looking up. "We in dinner rush. You want a break? Take one when you're unemployed." Ruby was rushing between tables, her energy stretched thin, but she still made time to help others. When Claire, a timid new waitress, dropped a tray full of drinks, Blake exploded in front of everyone. "Are you blind or just stupid?" Claire stammered, trying to pick up the glasses with shaking hands. But Ruby stepped in calmly, knelt down beside her, and said, "That was my fault. I bumped her." Ethan, watching from a distance, felt something shift inside him. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply absorbed the blame to shield someone weaker. He pulled out his phone, not to scroll, but to take notes. He observed how the kitchen staff avoided eye contact with Blake, how the bartender slipped a few dollars from their tips into a Blake jar, a quiet tax they paid to avoid confrontation. Ethan's notes grew longer. Then he noticed a short exchange near the kitchen. A young busboy leaned in and whispered something to Ruby. She paused mid-step. "Hey, that inspector guy? Today? I think it's him." Ruby didn't look toward Ethan. She didn't panic. She simply froze for a moment, blinked slowly, and kept walking. Not a single word, not a single glance. But Ethan saw her spine straighten. The air around her changed. She knew someone was watching. She just didn't know who. The ribeye arrived on a hot, cast-iron plate, sizzling just slightly, its aroma rich and smoky. Ruby placed it gently before him, stepping back as she gave a tired but polite smile. Ethan picked up his knife and fork and took a bite. It was perfect, juicy, tender, layered with care. He could tell the chef still took pride in the food, even if everything else around him was falling apart. He glanced up at Ruby. Tell the chef, this is excellent. Her smile deepened, but not without hesitation. I will, she said quietly. Then her eyes darted toward the kitchen door as if she were worried someone might have overheard that simple praise. He studied her expression. The smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something behind it. Tension, fear, maybe even hope. A mix he'd come to recognize in people who carried burdens silently. As he continued eating, he watched her tend to other tables. She was efficient, kind, soft-spoken, never wasting a moment, but never missing a detail. Yet she kept glancing his way now and then, as if debating something silently. When he was nearly finished, she returned with the check. Thank you for dining with us, she said, setting down the small leather folder. But before she turned to leave, she subtly slipped something underneath it, barely noticeable. She walked away quickly. Ethan opened the check holder and saw a folded napkin, not part of the usual setup. Curious, he unfolded it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. If you're really the inspector, I beg you, look deeper. We're drowning, but not all of us deserve to sink. The handwriting was neat but faintly trembling. No name, no direct accusations, just raw honesty. Ethan stared at it, frozen. The weight of the words settled over him like a quiet storm. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a plea, not for herself, but for all of them. It came from someone who had hope left, but only a sliver. He looked up and saw Ruby across the room, taking an order with a straight face, as if she hadn't just risked everything. She never once looked back, and that, more than anything, left him speechless. The last customer left just after closing, and the staff moved with tired limbs as they began wiping down tables and flipping chairs. Lights dimmed gradually, casting longer shadows across the once busy floor. But the tension hadn't left. It had only grown heavier. In the back office, Blake sat hunched over his computer, a scowl locked on his face. His phone buzzed. An assistant manager from another location had messaged, hinting that someone from corporate might have visited that night. Possibly an inspector. Possibly incognito. Paranoia crept in fast. He slammed the desk drawer shut and marched out. His eyes scanned the floor like a spotlight searching for a suspect. They landed on Ruby. You, in the office. Now. Ruby hesitated for just a second, then followed him in silence. The door clicked shut behind her. The tiny room felt like a trap. Windowless, stale, walls too close. Blake leaned forward, voice low but sharp. Don't play dumb with me. I know someone from corporate was here tonight. Someone watching. You were serving him. Ruby remained still, her face unreadable. Blake's eyes narrowed. If I find out you said a word, one damn word about me, about this place, you gone. No references. No severance. Just out. She met his glare but didn't flinch. She said nothing. The silence stretched until it became a battle of willpower. Eventually, Blake waved her off with disgust. Get out of my office. She turned and walked out without a single word. In the kitchen, the lights flickered as staff packed up for the night. Chef Luca, who had seen the quiet exchange earlier, pulled Ruby aside near the dishwashing station. I saw you give him something, he whispered. Took guts. Just be careful. Ruby nodded slightly, but her eyes carried more weight than she let show. Unbeknownst to them, Ethan was watching the entire scene, silently, from a secured connection to the restaurant's private office camera feed. Earlier that week, while visiting the chain's central IT hub under his alias, he'd asked for security access as part of his supply audit. Now, from his hotel room, he saw everything. The threat, the silence, the bravery. He leaned back in his chair, the screen casting a pale glow on his face. His jaw was tight. He felt a growing anger, not at Ruby, but at what had become of the place he'd built. This restaurant was supposed to represent pride, opportunity, dignity. Instead, it had become a place of fear and silence. And he was done watching. In the days that followed, Ethan returned, not as the quiet diner from before, but as a completely different man. This time, he wore a logoed polo shirt, a clipboard in hand, and a corporate ID tag that read Jonathan Hayes, Wilder Supply Systems. No one recognized him. That was the point. He was introduced as a vendor liaison from the supply chain division, sent to conduct random audits on kitchen logistics, delivery logs, and vendor compliance. Blake, forced to act polite, welcomed him reluctantly but with guarded eyes. Ethan had given no real warning, only that corporate sent him. He started in the back, checking walk-in freezers, counting inventory, comparing shipment records. It all seemed routine on the surface, but he was studying patterns, falsified orders, inflated prices, duplicate invoices. In a locked drawer, he found 2 sets of books, one digital, one handwritten. The numbers didn't match. In the surveillance room, Ethan requested backup footage from earlier in the month, pretending to test the video clarity for a supply discrepancy. What he found instead were clips of Blake pocketing cash directly from the tip jar. Small amounts each time, but often enough that it formed a pattern. He printed a still and folded it into his pocket. During breaks, he casually interviewed the staff, pretending to log their thoughts on supplier performance. Most were nervous. They gave short answers, avoided eye contact, and refused to speak freely. But when he spoke to Claire, her voice trembled. "Supplies are okay. We make do." He paused, looked her in the eye, and said gently, "This won't go on any record. Just tell me what matters most to you, hey?" She hesitated, then leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ruby, if she hadn't talked me down that night, I would have walked out, or worse. She makes this place bearable." She slipped a small folded paper into his hand when no one was looking. He opened it later. It read, "Ruby saved me from quitting. Please protect her." Later that day, he watched as Blake publicly berated Ruby again, this time for a table's order being delayed, even though it had been the kitchen's mistake. In front of customers, he scolded her, using sharp words with a fake smile. Ruby said nothing, just quietly absorbed the humiliation, then returned to work. Ethan stood nearby, clipboard in hand, pretending to examine a broken crate of produce. His eyes never left her. He could see the ripple effect of her silence, the loyalty of those around her, the subtle respect, the quiet strength. And he could see Blake trying to crush it day by day. Ethan left the restaurant that evening earlier than expected. He walked down the block in silence, the wind cool against his face, the sounds of the city far too distant. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure what made him angrier, Blake's greed, or the system that had allowed it to grow unchecked. But one thing was now certain. He wasn't just here to watch anymore. The morning air buzzed with nervous anticipation. A mandatory staff meeting had been called. No details, no agenda, just a faint message from head office that someone important was visiting. The staff gathered in the dining area before opening hours, whispering in tight clusters, anxiety written across their faces. Blake stood near the front, trying to mask his unease behind a stiff smile and overconfidence. He straightened his tie 3 times, tapping his clipboard impatiently. "Let's make a good impression," he barked. Eyes forward, uniforms neat, no complaints today. Ruby stood quietly near the coffee station, hands folded in front of her apron. Her eyes flicked to the door every so often, but her expression remained unreadable. She had no idea who was coming. She just hoped it wasn't more bad news. The front doors opened, and a man in a charcoal gray suit stepped in. His shoes polished, his posture sharp, and his presence commanding, completely unlike the quiet diner from a few nights ago. Ethan walked in slowly, scanning the room. His gaze stopped on Ruby. For a brief moment, her brow furrowed. He looked familiar. Then he gave her a small, knowing smile, the same warm one he'd offered after she served him the steak. Recognition flashed in her eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Blake stepped forward, extending a hand. "Welcome, sir. I'm Martin Blake, regional." Ethan ignored the hand. He turned to the room and spoke with calm authority. "Good morning. My name is Ethan Wilder." The room froze. "I'm the founder and owner of Wilder Grill," he continued. "All 87 locations, including this one." Claire gasped audibly and almost dropped the tray she was carrying. A few staff members exchanged stunned glances. One cook dropped his pen. Blake's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan's voice remained steady, but the weight behind it was undeniable. "I've been visiting several of my restaurants in disguise. Watching, listening. This one gave me a lot to think about." He glanced at Ruby, whose expression remained still, but her eyes shimmered. "And some of you," he added, looking at the staff, "showed integrity, compassion, and strength, even when no one was watching. Especially one of you." He didn't say her name, but everyone knew who he meant. Then he turned back to Blake. "Others, however, have abused their power, stolen from the company, and created a culture of fear." The silence was suffocating. "I have documentation," Ethan continued, "videos, falsified records, and multiple witness statements. Effective immediately, Martin Blake is relieved of all duties and permanently removed from any future involvement with Wilder Grill." Blake tried to speak. "This is a misunderstanding." "It's over," Ethan said sharply, cutting him off. "You don't get to intimidate people anymore." Blake looked around, but no one moved. No one stood with him. He walked out alone, shoulders sagging. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud. And just like that, the air changed. The staff remained silent even after Blake was gone, as if waiting for something to confirm that it was truly over. The weight of fear had been so constant, so normal, that they didn't yet know how to breathe without it. Ethan walked over to the restaurant's media station and connected his tablet to the wall-mounted screen. One tap, and the truth began to play. First, a clip from the security feed showed Blake pocketing cash from the tip jar. Then another, berating Claire so harshly she visibly flinched. More footage followed, from different angles, different days, and even from another location, revealing how Blake mocked staff, manipulated invoices, and bragged about skimming money without anyone noticing. Gasps echoed around the room. Several staff members looked away, some in disbelief, some in quiet vindication. Clay's hands trembled slightly. Ruby stood completely still, her fingers tightly interlocked in front of her. Ethan paused the video. "This was not an isolated incident," he said calmly. "This was a pattern, a cancer growing in a space meant to nourish and support." He stepped away from the screen and turned to face Ruby. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't protest. You didn't try to be a hero," he said, his tone gentle but full of respect. "You wrote one note, honest, desperate, and brave. You didn't demand anything. You asked for justice quietly." Ruby looked down, blinking fast, but a tear still slipped down her cheek. Ethan smiled and continued. "And because of that one act, we've made decisions that will affect not just this restaurant, but every Wilder Grill moving forward." He opened a folder and began reading the changes aloud. "Effective immediately. All tips will be digitally tracked and paid out directly to staff. A new anonymous reporting line will be available for every employee at every location. Paid sick leave will be introduced across all branches. Every location will have a mandatory quarterly review led by corporate, unannounced. And we're launching a partnership with a mental health provider, free counseling for all staff." The room remained silent, but this time it was the silence of awe, not fear. Then, someone began clapping. It was Chef Luca. One slow, steady clap that quickly grew louder as others joined in. Waiters, cooks, hostesses, even the dishwasher. And then all eyes turned to Ruby. She tried to smile through her tears, covering her mouth with one hand. But the emotion overwhelmed her. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder. A full standing ovation erupted in the dining area. For her courage, for her kindness, for her quiet refusal to let injustice become normal. Ruby had never asked for recognition. But in that moment, she stood taller than anyone else in the room. 1 month later, the atmosphere inside the same Wilder Grill was almost unrecognizable. The energy had shifted entirely. Lighter, freer, alive. Smiles came easier. Laughter wasn't whispered or cautious anymore. The staff moved with confidence, no longer walking on eggshells. They had been given more than policies. They'd been given dignity. Ethan stood near the kitchen pass, watching quietly as plates moved swiftly from Chef Luca's hands to the servers. The chef looked revitalized, his coat crisp, his eyes focused, his voice steady and kind. No more tension, no more fear, only leadership. Luca had been promoted to head chef of the entire region. He was now in charge of mentoring new chefs at other Wilder Grill locations, replicating the soul of this reborn branch. Claire now trained new hires. Her once fragile voice now rang with calm authority. She led workshops on empathy, inclusion, and workplace dignity. People listened to her not because they had to, but because she had lived it and risen from it. But the most celebrated change came with Ruby. Ethan had called her into his office, not Blake's old domain, but the newly converted team lounge that had once been used as storage. It was warm now, welcoming. He offered her a cup of tea as he spoke. "I'd like you to take on a new role," he said. "Regional training manager. You'll travel to other locations, meet new teams, and teach them the culture we're building." Ruby blinked. "Me?" He smiled. "You saw everything, and still believed something could be saved. That's the kind of leadership I want." She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "And one more thing," Ethan added, reaching into his jacket and pulling out an envelope. "For your mother's treatments. You mentioned she was sick. No one who gives this much to others should have to fight alone." Her eyes filled with tears again. "You remembered?" "I never forgot." Later that evening, after closing, the two stood on the rooftop of the restaurant. The city lights blinked around them, and the wind was soft, almost reverent. Ethan leaned on the railing beside her. "Someone once told me the chef pours his heart into the ribeye," he said with a smile. Turned out, that person poured her heart into everything. Ruby chuckled gently. It was true. Chef Luca always did. He looked at her for a moment, thoughtful. "Do you still write poetry?" Ruby hesitated, then pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from her purse and handed it to him. "Not many people have seen this, but I think you're part of the reason this poem exists." He opened to the last page. At the top, handwritten in clean, delicate script, was the title: Steak, Silence, and the Savior in Disguise. Ethan read the poem quietly, a smile growing with each line. The final verse hit him hard. It wasn't just beautiful, it was true. He closed the notebook and handed it back, his eyes warm. "May I hang that in my office?" Ruby nodded, laughing softly through tears. "Only if you promise not to change the title." "I wouldn't dare," he said. The stars overhead blinked faintly, the wind shifted again, and somewhere far below them, someone was setting a table for tomorrow. The story had come full circle, but its impact was just beginning. The grand reopening of a remodeled Wilder Grill bustled with quiet excitement. This wasn't just another branch. It was now the flagship, the beating heart of a brand that had rediscovered its soul. Customers filled the sleek new booths, sunlight poured through tall windows, and laughter echoed without fear. Near the front of the restaurant, something new caught everyone's eye. On the freshly printed menus, beneath the chef's signature selection section, a new dish stood proudly. Ruby's ribeye, inspired by those who see injustice and still serve with grace. The staff spoke about it with reverence. It was the same ribeye the restaurant had always served, but now it carried a legacy. One of quiet courage, of small actions that rippled outward and changed everything. Near the main wall, a framed quote hung in delicate calligraphy. It wasn't from a critic, a celebrity, or even Ethan himself. It was a single line from Ruby's anonymous napkin. "Not all of us deserve to sink." Guests paused in front of it. Some read it twice. A few even took photos. It had already begun to live beyond the paper it was written on. At a nearby table, Ruby stood beside a nervous new waitress, showing her how to balance a tray without tipping the glasses. She smiled patiently, correcting gently, listening carefully. The same quiet grace she'd always carried now radiated openly. She had become the example others looked to. Across the room, Ethan sat by the window, coffee in hand, watching the scene with a quiet pride. He didn't need to speak. He'd said what mattered. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a place where courage had found its voice, where dignity wasn't demanded, but nurtured, and where one folded napkin had reshaped an empire. As Ruby helped the new girl take her first table, her voice low and steady, Ethan's gaze softened, and in a voiceover, or perhaps just a whisper in the air, the final line settled into place. She slipped him a note, and he gave her a future, but what they really exchanged was faith.